1972 sees John Borman's hit Deliverance, in which four white-collar urban Southerners fight for their lives after they're attacked by a band of cabin-dwelling sadists. They meet this misfortune deep in country wilderness, but this is no standard take on the terrible place. We see no mad science here, not unless you count the preternatural hunting and trapping skills of the idiot savant villains in the movie's second half, or the effortless banjo-playing chops of the Georgia local in the movie's first. Borman brings a naturalist's eye to Deliverance, giving us long shots of the Kaluawasi River Valley and its surrounding woods. And we're seeing a lot of this sort of thing lately. Long takes of complex ecosystems, unvarnished by character or commentary, pepper blood waters of Dr. Z, not to mention the almost as hokey frogs. This gothic Rayma vehicle also favors the Florida swamps, and its title sequence has a photographer in a canoe capturing riverbank lizards on 35mm still camera with herpetological zeal. Frogs' cinematographer pays less attention to niceties than Borman, shooting instead in the verite style that's become a popular alibi recently for low-budget filmmakers. Hence, the title sequence gives the exotic flora little preference over shots of spilled, waterlogged plastic bags and soda cups. It's as though story of a panicked Janet had taken to the Florida backwaters, as though Leyland had transcended his judgment that some sites are unworthy of preservation. Environmental consciousness is all the rage. It's been more than a year since the Nixon administration founded the EPA, and in concert with the Gaia realization, this has led to some rather corny reflections on man's place in the cosmos. As spring 1972 approaches, Universal hitches its wagon to this fad with Silent Running, a visual extravaganza by 2001: A Space Odyssey's effects wizard Doug Trumbull. The semi-sequel fuses the earlier movie's lonesome aesthetic to a heavy-handed environmental message about the fragility of the earthly ecosphere. The basic idea isn't new. Sci-fi writers have been cultivating flora and fauna on vast starships since Brian Aldiss's Non-Stop in 1958 and before. Trumbull brings a grandeur to this theme, though, with his detailed model spacecraft, greener, mass-produced versions of the bone-dry Discovery. They've formed a convoy, staging a peculiarly slow flyby of Saturn. This is a side trip. They're mainly on their way to jettison the last of Earth's shrubbery and bunny rabbits into outer space. Silent Running testifies here to the utility of human progress in a way that sits uneasily with the movie's overt anti-technological theme. Already 4 years old, 2001 was originally to be set near Saturn, but rendering her rings presented such a practical challenge that the movie was relocated to Jupiter instead. To largely carry the $1 million movie on his own, star Bruce Dern relies heavily on the bug-eyed stylings his fellow traveler Jack Nicholson honed in Roger Corman's also very green Little Shop of Horrors, and while staring at the stars in Easy Rider. Dern's realization of the Valley Forge's astronautical groundskeeper, Freeman Lowell, that name, merges Nicholson's crazed affect with a devotion to nature's glories that vacillates between overbearing and fanatical. This is, after all, a good time to wring one's hands over the environment, though Dern might sometimes make a vice of the privilege. The Keep America Beautiful campaign, with its sorrowful Indian spokesman, mourning litter on the nation's highways, is a sensational success, and hammy actors are giving us overblown cautionary tales about the decaying planet in lesser filmic outings from Godzilla vs. the Smog Monster to the aforementioned frogs and bloodwaters of Dr. Z. The country's gone EPA crazy. Though broad in its execution, Silent Running's lecturing works on a certain moody level. There's something ineluctably dreary in the movie's last 40 minutes, and as Freeman regresses into solipsism aboard the derelict Valley Forge, he goes buzzing around the warehouse in a four-wheeled buggy, hoping to rekindle some sort of a spark in his dead soul. But he only ends up brooding on the fellow astronauts he murdered to protect the ship's botanical cargo. He fusses over a pair of utility robots that aren't even trying to pass the Turing test, desperate as he is for any kind of sentient company. When the forest starts dying, he's stumped until he realizes it's not getting enough sun, an oversight that makes one wonder how he landed this job in the first place. Finally, he dispatches the forest dome, fitted with sun lamps, but out in the open, under clear glass, into the swallowing darkness of deep space. The closing credits roll over the receding dome as Joan Baez's folksy melodies try to convince us this ending is a hopeful one. But another trending theme at the moment, unlikely cousin to that of environmental concern, is the second law of thermodynamics, and popular contemporary writers like Thomas Pynchon, Joseph Heller, and Kurt Vonnegut would here remind the cinema audience of Intrepid's dictates. This interplanetary nature reserve is going to be lifeless and dark in a month, its heat dissipated to absolute zero. The Apollo program hasn't had a flight since last December, but NASA is improvising a path forward nonetheless. Its emphasis has shifted to near-Earth orbit, and in spring of 1973, the Saturn V rocket launches Skylab into service. Movie makers, mirroring NASA's shifting priorities, turn their gaze closer to home as well. This year sees them eschew the deep cosmic fantasy of silent running for the Orwellian Stranded in Space, episode 405, all of which transpires on a duplicate Earth. That's about as local as one can get and still be off-world at all. We've seen this duplicate Earth idea used before to carry a film. Who could forget the identically situated planet Terra from Gamera vs. Guiron? Stranded in Space is less literal. We're never told where this mirror Earth, which is also named Terra, is in relation to our planet, the movie makers preferring to beg the question. They insinuate that the stranded astronaut of the title has gone off course after a mid-flight calamity that also knocked him unconscious. But we're not sure exactly where he's ended up, certainly not to the fully plottable degree of accuracy Guiron provides. In another sense, though, the twinning here is more comprehensive than we see in Guiron. Far from being a stark contrast or an opposite of Earth, Stranded in Space's unnamed planet is an almost identical copy, complete with gray flannel suits, up-to-date 1970s hairstyles, and streets resembling those of downtown Los Angeles, along which travel standard four-wheeled coupes that in a preposterously unlikely happenstance look just like the ones we have. Another contrast is that instead of flinging monsters our way, Stranded in Space's Planet Xers are the unlikely target of a beast we've sent to them, the ruggedly named and ruggedly built Neil Stryker, who threatens to infect their society with toxic ideas about Western freedom. Their planet, it turns out, does differ from ours in at least one critical way. Its society has devolved into an open-air prison governed by a totalitarian ideology a bit too conspicuously modeled after those of Brave New World, 1984, and Fahrenheit 451. The first page of its most comprehensive history book reads, "It all started with the perfect order." A ham-fisted adaptation of Huxley's Fortean calendar in Brave New World, where it all started with the Model T. However, Huxley and Orwell took some pains to leave the ideological thrust of their dystopian states ambiguous. The red-baiting tenor of the animated Animal Farm television adaptation was a late edition of the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom. Orwell himself saw that paths to totalitarianism veer both left and right. Brave New World's dystopia, revolving as it does around the capitalist innovation of mass production, demonstrates that for Huxley, too, communism was not the sole potential origin of totalitarian excess. Stranded in Space's writers feel no similar obligation to engage in nuance, but it's present nonetheless in their imperfect attempt at political polemic. They never explicitly name the ideological underpinning of their fictional society, but it's collectivism, clearly enough. They even borrow from the 50s and 60s communist films at their most broad, so that, for example, Stryker outs his Terran doctor as an imposter by casually concocting a professional basketball player named Paul Revere, and noting the doctor's failure to mention the American revolutionary by the same name. 20 years before, Invasion USA played the theme for this variation with a National Guardsman who unmasks a red infiltrator with a question about the Chicago Cubs baseball team.
Cub is a young animal, a bear. Sergeant the guy, Sergeant the guy!
This scene's a little different. The doctor explains away his ignorance by disclaiming any knowledge of the sporting world rather than simply flying into a panic. But the idea is the same. The problem is, the American mood toward communist Eurasia has waxed conciliatory since Stalin's death. In 1972, the Nixon administration signs the SALT arms reduction agreement with the Soviets, and a landmark anti-ballistic missile treaty to boot. Relations with China have also thawed. Aside from Skylab, NASA's other main spaceflight endeavor is a planned orbital docking of Apollo and Soviet Soyuz capsules, also conceived this year before and planned for the middle of the decade. Since their 50s heyday, panicky vagaries about communist infiltration have yielded a near-extinction event in the Cuban Missile Crisis and an apocalyptic bloodletting in Vietnam. Hence, American audiences have lost much of their taste for Red Scare politics. This might be why Stranded in Space has to lay it on so thick. Take Terran strongman Benedict's later lengthy oration on the dangers of individuality.
Before the perfect order, the history books were filled with stories of one man alone that changed the entire course of our great planet. One man alone wanting to be dictator. One man alone thinking he was God. One man alone feeling he knew what was best for all mankind. Our society works because we all believe the same way. We all feel alike. We all dedicate ourselves to what's best for the perfect order, and in turn, the perfect order does what's best for us. Then someone comes along. Someone with very different ideas, with very destructive ideas. Do you know what I've learned from this man, Doctor? I've learned that he's cursed with an absolute freedom of thought. He's cursed with an inquisitive nature, an uncontrollable spirit. He's cursed much the same way most of our own society was cursed before the perfect order. And now, Doctor, he's walking freely in our streets, in our midst. Oh, believe me, Doctor. Today, one man. Tomorrow, 10. In a week, 1,000. In a month.
The effort here to paint collectivist thought as a universal menace is more than a little obvious. Surely even the most indoctrinated Maoists would chafe at the idea that society only works when everyone shares identical beliefs and feelings. More interesting here is the irreducible tension in the speech's final flourish, the blooming of one man into an epidemic. It's hard here not to think, of course, of Alice's Restaurant Massacre and Arlo Guthrie's gag about two draft resistors stirring up an anti-war revolution. If one person, just one person, sings Alice's Restaurant, they may think he's really thick, and they won't take him. If 50 people do, they may think it's a movement. Where this stanza of Arlo Guthrie's song works toward a pretty clear end, Stranded in Space's point in reprising it is harder to puzzle out. Is Benedict's worry the individual or the group? Independence of thought or the mob mentality? In aligning Benedict with Guthrie's establishment figures, Alice's Restaurant's Shrink and Army Sergeant, are Stranded's movie makers also likening their hero to the Vietnam War draft dodgers? It seems unlikely. Stryker's as all-American as I Dream of Jeannie's Major Nelson. Though it's hard not to notice Nelson was also exempt from combat service for some reason. This sort of tension has tended to underlie Cold War narratives from the get-go, even as market utopias make use of the collective impulse, and even workers' utopias have need of the occasional hero. Stranded in Space is called back to the 50s body snatcher movies as ill-timed and heavy-handed. Its investigations into the dangers of mad psychiatry land much better. Stryker is more guinea pig than patient as he passes lonely weeks at the hospital, wondering where his family and friends are, and nursing more and more suspicions about the cagey medical staff. He has good reason to wonder. In reality, Terran intelligence is subjecting him to a high-tech interrogation, monitoring him through one-way glass, and discussing his fate from an adjacent control room.
I believe you can break him, yes.
Break him, says Dr. Revere.
But you also stand a chance of breaking his mind as well.
Stryker complains of dreams that feel as though he's reliving his whole life, and we're the only ones who know that this isn't just his imagination. The Terrans are dosing him with truth serum in the hopes that he'll murmur secrets in his sleep. In reality, interrogations such as these have proliferated since brainwashing in Red China, Edward Hunter's seminal 1951 book on the subject. Though experiments in psychotropic coercion like MK-Ultra and its offshoots are still being conducted in secret, the last few years have seen some frightening allegations of U.S. government oversteps. This has ranged from illegal domestic surveillance to systematic atrocities abroad. The Watergate investigation is getting the biggest headlines, but not the only ones. In 1971, public-spirited burglars uncovered a domestic spying program, COINTELPRO, that targeted the anti-war and civil rights movements. The following year saw a similar revelation of something called the Phoenix Program, which sought leverage in the Vietnam conflict via torture, industrial-scale terrorism, and semi-targeted mass murder. The Phoenix Program functioned, among other things, as an answer to the communists' own Korean War excesses, but they also expanded on them in the way any intellectual discipline grows more sophisticated over time. Phoenix featured the use of field telephones to administer grueling electric shocks, rape and the threat of rape as a means of gaining emotional leverage, and other barbaric but also carefully thought out techniques for extracting information from targeted individuals. Stryker endures nowhere near so much suffering as did the real-life victims of Phoenix, of course, but the predations of his Terran interrogators do, in their own way, cut to the quick of him. Loneliness dogs his psyche. He comes to doubt his own ability to reason, and there's the matter of these dreams waylaying his mind like a mock execution, bearing his consciousness. As his interrogation drags on, he faces relegation to Ward E, a laboratory for penetrating even deeper into the mind and will that ultimately destroys its test subjects. We don't learn much about Ward E. Maybe its R's equal those of the Phoenix Program.
The World Trade Center is completed this year after 3 years of construction. The first two towers of the 7-building complex reconfigure Manhattan, and the Trade Center towers become the tallest buildings in the world. This is a fact of some note in a public discourse that also sees the Guinness Book of World Records vie for the title of best-selling reference book. The towers enjoy only an ambivalent presence in cinema, one that matches their presence in real life. They turn up in today's movies less than you would expect, but when they do, it's in the interest of specular awe. I'm thinking particularly here of Sisters, a Hitchcock knockoff in which the director usurps the towers for a half-dozen establishing shots. Though surreptitious, the way establishing shots are meant to be, these captures of Lower Manhattan also align figuratively with the movie's story. This concerns conjoined twins separated dangerously late in life. The procedure kills one, and the other compensates by lapsing into a fugue in which she becomes a psychopathic killer. It's not wholly unproductive here to think back to A Touch of Satan. Trade Towers 1 and 2 protrude like sibling middle fingers through the smooth contour of the industrial-age Manhattan skyline. In so doing, they offend many. The going style is to answer the ornamental designs of the robber baron and interwar periods, which typify Manhattan's loftier buildings with post-war angularity. We've already seen this in the recent monuments to Rockefeller and Pan Am, but the World Trade Center complex takes things to another level. There are 7 buildings to it, true, but only the first 2 register visually from the perspective across the Hudson. And the look of the tallest buildings mirrors the sordid aesthetic of Warhol or the grid of the computer punch card. There's no irregularity in the twin towers, save that one sports an antenna and the other doesn't. Their boxy, blank faces alter the contour of the world's most distinctive skyline as though they've been projected here from a more regimented world. Individually, each tower has no distinguishing features to speak of. If there had been only one, it might have been dismissed as a fluke. With 2, we know it will continue, and there are plenty of reasons to be uneasy about this. Why wouldn't the regimented and fearless twin towers further provoke those fearful neurotics who already tremble over the prospect of global communist conquest? The towers seem a fitting instrument of communist design. Their uniform windows eschew all as individualist aesthetic. Their makers' reluctance to use opaque materials results in a building that seems transparent. Its faces are all smooth glass, linked with fingers of narrow steel frame, there being no stone for secrecy. But they are not transparent. A child might imagine an all-glass high-rise as a kind of aquarium, the activities within evident to any nearby Manhattan pedestrian. It's not, though. The Trade Center's material instead reifies the function of Insulux, which is to provide a sense of transparency while being opaque. The glass is engineered like a one-way mirror with a differential between the inner and outer translucence, such that a Trade Center worker may gaze at the Congress below, but pedestrians only see the sun's reflection or those of Manhattan's other buildings. This, too, makes a brilliant parallel with Lenin's Workers' Utopia. When put in practice, at least it's true of communism as characterized by its critics. Those in the enlightened Soviet proletariat toil just as Western workers do, and they're told they do so toward a better end. But meanwhile, the Soviet Union's elite rules in opulence, exploiting the labor of the people while maintaining its own invisibility. The problem, of course, is that it makes a brilliant parallel with the faults of the capitalist system, too. Do the Chamber of Commerce's complaints about the left not also apply to the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's complaints about the right? The World Trade Center is just as much an embodiment of capitalist excess as communist subversion. On one level, this is obvious. The lifeless, uniform grids of the twin Trade Center towers can embody either communism's lifeless uniformity or the efficient doggerel of Henry Ford's assembly line. On another, it eludes. What are we to make of this cold grid work carved into the world's most famous skyline? It seems to contradict the melting pot message of idealized pre-1970 Manhattan. A smooth heartbeat of commerce, its throb coaxed into being by the trade between continents across a vast ocean. If the city's profile were the line of a heart monitor, the towers would be a palpitation. It's been more than a year since the last Apollo mission was canceled in favor of Skylab, NASA's much more modest surrogate project. Hanging in low Earth orbit, the space station is tasked mainly with extending the duration rather than the range of human extra-atmospheric habitation. Thus, its guests soon break duration records for orbital visits, staying in the craft for months at a time. The militarist prognostications of Rocket Ship XM and Project Moonbase haven't come to pass. The space station is instead broadly taking up silent runnings sensibilities. Rather than spy on terrestrial targets or make bellicose threats from space, the Skylab astronauts content themselves with botanical experiments and sun surveys. The moon, meanwhile, is proving too remote to be of much strategic use to U.S. war planners. General Greene's aspiration of establishing a permanent base there to monitor world peace is drifting further and further away. On consideration, the prospects for colonizing outer space have always been dim. New colonies are typically established by subjugating or seducing indigenous populations and co-opting terrestrial resources, and this has been true since at least the Spanish landings on the New World, certainly since the days of Jungle Goddess and Lost Continent. Unfortunately, there aren't any resources on the moon. It's simply barren rock, and we've known this since the Soviets first photographed the lunar dark side in 1959. It goes without saying there are no natives either. Life elsewhere in the solar system in anything but the most fundamental microbial forms can now be just about ruled out. In classic Freudian fashion, popular culture responds to this dashing of the Duchess's dream by resorting to fantasy, the imperfect satisfaction of drives and impulses through image formation. Thus, the settlers' outposts and rocket transports envisioned in the skies of the 50s and early 60s are giving way in this age of Aquarius to more spiritual and abstract visions of outer space. The heavens eagerly play along. Last year, the comet Cowtown tilted everyone's attention skyward, and though the light show ultimately proved disappointing, it nevertheless kept the otherworldly at the top of everyone's mind. UFO sightings are on the uptick, too. More and more abduction is part of the story the targeted individuals tell, and more the experience they relate sounds not entirely unpleasant. The term for this is a close encounter of the fourth kind. The other three involve sighting a craft, effect, or being in that order. A close encounter differs essentially from, for instance, the hostile alien visitation in Invaders from Mars. When space colonization still seemed possible, aliens, that is, the indigenous population of the rest of the universe, posed a likely threat. Since then, the realization of space travel has meant acknowledging the sad limits of its possibilities. Now that we know we've gone as far into space as we're likely to go, the aliens are starting to look like a chance to catch a ride. We see something of this in the enigmatic Phase 4, episode K09, which opens in the manner of 2001 and already now countless imitators, with celestial bodies coming into alignment. This syzygy inevitably coincides with mysterious cosmic happenings. As a result, all the world's ants, yes, ants, have cohered into a singular consciousness by the movie's end and are well on their way to subduing or destroying the entire human race. It's not evident what goes on in the interim, but our reminiscing hero, speaking over the opening special effects shot, has a go at explaining it.
That spring, we were all watching the events in space and wondering what the final effect would be. Astronomers argued over theory, while engineers got pretty excited about variables in magnetic fields. Mystics predicted earthquakes and the end of life as we knew it.
Meantime, we're treated to several lengthy takes of ants scurrying hither and thither in a labyrinth of tiny rooms and corridors. Like the Blood Waters of Dr. Z, Phase 4 here uses macro lens photography as a stand-in for process or special effects shots. Extremely small environments, shown in great detail with little depth of focus, give a sense of the strange and spectacular on a budget, without the need to resort to miniatures, blue screens, or other pricier techniques.
When the effect came,
The narrator
it was almost
continued.
unnoticed, because it happened to such a small and insignificant form of life.
He explains that he's teamed up with a British scientist, Ernest Hubbs, who has noticed ants self-organizing in unprecedented ways in the wake of the cosmic alignment, the effect, and parried this into a university-brokered research project, one to which the narrator has also been attached. As he goes into this in too much meandering detail, in terms of telling the story, none of this prologue needs to be here at all. The macro lens shots of the scrabbling ants continue over a gathering soundscape for organ and upright bass. Again, an effort is being made to capture the grandeur of the 2001 cinematic experience on a tiny fraction of its budget. Like 2001 too, here the aliens, if that's indeed what they are, never appear in the flesh. They probably have no physical form at all. Even by referring to a them in the third person plural, we might have already lost the plot. It's a trick you're seeing more and more, not just in the alien invasion movies, but also in the adjuncts. The Parallax View, a political thriller out this year, 1974, focuses too on a faceless, sinister intelligence, this time one that secretly drives the American espionage apparatus and its highest echelons of power. Usually movies of this type ultimately reveal a single figure orchestrating the subterfuge, like the handler Angela Lansbury plays in The Manchurian Candidate. Once this variable's removed from the equation, society returns to normal. Not so in Parallax, where the evil actors are known only by their deeds. The suspicious murders and suicides, or the bizarre Parallax test, a seemingly authorless personality questionnaire geared at unearthing psychopathologies. The film's climax has Lee, the reporter investigating the elite, murdered by a point-of-view shot, Hitchcock style. So unseen is this malevolence that, though director Alan Pakula never suggests as much, it could just as easily be a marauding alien force as anything else. The movie even opens atop the Space Needle, the rocket and saucer monument the 62 World's Fair left hovering over the Seattle skyline. If there were a regularly updated edition of the Divine Comedy, and it had a new circle meant for those who've died on television, Christine Chubbuck would be added to its souls on July 15th, 1974, when she commits suicide via pistol live on a local newscast. The ranks of this exclusive circle now number at least 3: Inajiro Asanuma, Lee Harvey Oswald, and she. This unsettling incident unfolds in Dr. Z's home state of Florida, but it isn't only here that strange and terrible things are going on.